In this era of AI and transformation and uncertainty, creative still matters.
It totally matters. The machine, at least today, doesn't know taste that well. All of the AI tools I've seen so far have to be directed by a creative who says that's it or that's not it. Maybe at some point in the future we'll be in a different place, but we are not there today.
Marketing today feels a little overwhelming. The ground keeps shifting faster than we can keep up. We're supposed to be in the era where marketing is the engine of growth. So why do the leaders who can actually navigate that chaos feel so rare? Hi, I'm Josh Vanier, VP of AI and Marketing Strategy at Google, and welcome to Frontier CMO. I'm excited about today's guest because he's one of those rare leaders who's delivering impact through change at one of the most complex, largest, and, quote, old school companies in the world. Norm de Greve has spent much of his career navigating moments of massive change. At CVS, he helped reinvent the company's identity by walking away from billions in tobacco revenue. At Digitas, he lived through the first waves of digital transformation. And at General Motors, he stepped in as the company was rebuilding almost everything at once: the portfolio, the marketing model, the operating system, the mindset. In this episode, Norm talks openly about what sparked GM's turnaround and why constant change is both energizing and terrifying for the teams inside it. Norm also lifts the hood on GM's new growth structure, their AI-powered Metropolis platform, and the creative overhaul reshaping how the company shows up in the world. It's a candid look at what it takes to lead inside a business moving at the speed of reinvention. That's enough from me. Here's my conversation with Norm de Greve. I've decided I made a huge mistake in my career. I should have stuck and stayed in automotive. I've been listening to all these podcasts. I've been watching these things on YouTube. I found this podcast called The Auto Line After Hours. I have no idea if it's GM approved or not, but they're fascinating guys. And so I've just been listening to all this stuff. And I worked on GM way back in the day when I was in my Goodby Silverstein advertising days. So I went to Detroit a lot. But the auto business is unbelievably complex and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons that I took the job. I had done some work for GM and I'd seen a lot of industries, but automotive is just fascinating. It really is. There are just very few places that it's like a medallion product where it says something about who you are. People judge you by it. So brand really matters. And also have this massive research phase that spews off tons of data, and also has the actual individual register the purchase at the end so you can close the loop. There's just like very few places that have all of that. The other thing that's fascinating is it's really a momentum business. It takes so long to make new products that when you get it right, and if you're ahead of your competitors, they cannot do much. And when you get it wrong and your competitors are ahead of you, you cannot do much. You just have to get it right in the next product cycle. And that part for me was fascinating. If you look at kind of the history of GM, I mean, in the 1960s, it held half the US auto market, 50% market share.
Wow.
And pretty much once the 70s showed up until, the 2000s, sometimes it was just a decline in market share for a long time because the products weren't as competitive as they needed to be. And marketing was kind of tasked with kind of covering that up a lot. Like, hey, look over here. This is cool. If you forget about the car, you'll be cool. If you have this car, you'll be associated with something else. And now the products are back, which was no small feat, really an amazing kind of corporate America story, but the products are really back. And that makes the marketing a lot more interesting and a lot more fun to do as well, because, you're operating off strength and you're not operating off weakness.
So as I was preparing for this interview, as we were preparing for this notion of a Frontier CMO, and we'll talk about that a little bit, looking at your resume, looking at the history of GM, looking at all the places you've worked, change just seems like this really constant part of your world. You've been at the center of or within some really big moments in change. But I just want to go back to what you said about getting the product right, because ultimately good product sells. Good marketing can't sell a bad product. What happened inside GM a year ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago to get you to good product today?
The ultimate catalyst was going bankrupt in the 2000s.
That'll do it.
Because you can tell yourself any story you want to tell yourself, but when you're bankrupt, there's really no hiding that there's a problem. And that wasn't just a one-time event. The Treasury Department had people sitting in meetings at GM for a long time. So like every day you were a bit humiliated that you can't run your business. And so that to me was really the catalyst that said this idea of pride or we can make it work or whatever it was that was keeping the old model floating, or even the fact that you had all these constraints of all these different, you couldn't raise your prices or you couldn't change your EBIT or your costs were a certain way. Bankruptcy helped clear that.
So when you were hired to General Motors, it's been a couple of years now, right?
Yeah.
Were you brought in, do you believe, with a change mandate of, we know we've got good product, we need to turn marketing around, or we need to change things up, or we need to match the velocity and momentum we see on the product side, on the marketing side?
Yeah. I mean, there was good marketing before I showed up. The reason that I was asked to join was to match the model of marketing that was needed for the challenges of today. And what was happening is, in addition to making all these better products, there was a huge movement to EVs, of course, and EVs are great for all the reasons we know. They are also a lot less profitable than gas vehicles. And who doesn't care about that is Wall Street. And so what we had is launching all these new vehicles, some of which are new nameplates. Now it's a product that is a new name. It takes a lot of money to embed that name into people's heads. And an operating model, not just a marketing, but for the company, and a vision that was challenged with profitability to get to that vision. And so you really needed a fundamentally different approach to getting there and to delivering on that than we had before. So in some ways, it was less about the work before wasn't good. It was just a different model, and it was a different time, and a different model was needed for that time. Now, what that meant was a pretty substantial transformation of how marketing operates. Yeah.
We're gonna get into that, but before we do, I mentioned earlier, you've been around some pretty momentous moments, and you're famous for the CVS dropping tobacco. You worked at Digitas through a pretty transformative decade in Digitas's history. You were an entrepreneur, started your own company back in the day, and I just, as you think about these moments of change and then coming to General Motors, what is your personal motivation? Do you enjoy being at the frontier of these change moments? Does it ever become overwhelming? How do you process and cope with, here we go again, momentous change, constant upheaval?
I like to build things, is really the core of it.
It also feels like we're trying to identify the attributes and the skills needed to be a frontier CMO, to operate at this sort of bleeding edge of marketing and of industry. But change is coming faster and faster. And it feels like it's now a fundamental, there is no normal or regular, it's constant change. I see that in my role at Google. I'm sure you see it at GM as well. If you're not comfortable in operating at this change context, you're not going to succeed, right?
And I think a job of a leader is to help people feel secure in different ways, because the change is happening. So like if you can tell them we're going to figure it out and I believe in you, that takes a lot of anxiety out of them. But the actual facts aren't changing. I have this, I'm kind of known for a phrase of like, you can only move forward, or we can only move forward. And it's just so true. It's just what happens. And what you're pointing out is the velocity of this change continues to increase. And I think the AI thing is scary, not just for all the reasons we know, but for one reason, that it's really defied what our historical understanding of change was, which was a little bit in technology, that we get so excited in the short term that we way overestimate what it's going to do for us.
Right.
In some ways, for those of us who had been around a while, there was some comfort in that. No, this is the phase where we overestimate, and then it's good. Then it will be good. But we'll have some time. And I think in AI, we're just seeing that we continually don't overestimate it. It continually outperforms our estimations. And so that creates some anxiety too.
In all this sort of talk of constant change, As I was preparing for all this conversation, your role changed. So you're now the chief growth officer of General Motors. What does that mean? And is this a new paradigm for marketing? Is the CMO need to become a chief growth officer? What's your take on all this?
Well, in general, I think that there's a lot of pressure on marketers to be clear on how they're driving growth. And you're seeing the chief growth officer role pop up in a lot of places. We had a couple of things going on at GM, and the reason my role evolved, which was we'd done a huge transformation of marketing in the US, and we saw two opportunities for growth. One was everything outside the US needed to go to the same place. And then in the US, we looked and we saw, particularly like social and events, that the comms and the marketing teams were overlapping a little bit. They were doing some of the same stuff. And we thought, well, we could pull those teams together and make sure that they're on the same theme and same story. And so we wanted to make that happen and have some leverage.
I think getting to an agreed definition of what growth is pretty important. There's the financial office, the CFO's office, and what they think growth is, and which tends to count for a lot in these conversations.
Yeah, but Josh, you see this. Like, there is only one definition of growth. It's sales. Like, we can call it whatever we want, but that, like, I don't really know people who measure growth any other way than sales.
Right. So let me just follow up on that, because you said a few minutes ago about EVs are a much lower margin. So I'll just speculate here. There is a group of people inside of GM who would articulate we should sell more ICE cars, you call them, internal combustion engine ICE, cars, right?
Internal combustion engine, which means gas, but it's called ICE, sometimes referred to as the ICE age.
Okay, so we should sell more ICE age cars, because that's going to mean larger profits and more margin and all the rest of it, and don't promote the EVs as much. But you guys have made a bet on the EVs. So there is, even when you get under the hood of what growth is, and sales feels like it's too limited, although I completely get the point that sales are important.
Well, the ratio of the products that you want to sell is kind of driven at kind of the overall business unit or CEO level. That marketing's job is to help deliver on that. Now, in terms of the automotive industry, it's absolutely true that the gas vehicles make more money. But we had seen the future in terms of it's just a better experience to be in an EV. They're quieter, they're smoother in acceleration, they're faster in acceleration. There's everything about them that's just a better experience. What's important to note, though, is within that, our job as a company is to follow consumer demand. That's what we do. And so, when we look out at the EV versus gas mix, we'll follow where the consumer demand goes. I drive an EV, a couple of them, and I love it. And I'll never drive a gas car again, because once you drive an EV, it's fantastic. But others will make different choices for different reasons.
So I think you're getting to part of the conversation with the CMOs that chief growth officers have to have, which is, short-term versus long-term, profit now versus profit later. And it feels like there is always a constant tension and push and pull. As you navigate and as you work through this new growth role, as you've done so for the last couple of years, just talk a little bit about that tension between the short-term gains and the sort of the medium and long-term benefits of the brand for your individual marks.
Yeah, well, I think first it's how do you even judge the effectiveness of your marketing? We look at it at a minimum of 12 months. So when you get into short-term versus long-term, you'll have a business unit leader sometimes like, that's great, but I need to make my numbers like today. And what are you going to do about that? And that's just reality. Like, you can't live in a vacuum. Sometimes you have to make those decisions. But as a general operating mentality, we're operating off of 12-month plus kind of best ways to do things. That takes care of, I'd say, 80% of the answer. There's another 20%, which is, I'd say, really core brand building that's frankly just really harder to measure. And that comes from just a belief system that imbuing your product or service with some sort of deeper characteristics and meaning drives demand. And I've seen this over my career. There are people who believe in it, and there are people who don't. And the people who don't will basically never be convinced. And the people who believe in it don't need to be convinced.
So inside Google, this is quite a few years ago, but we did this fun experiment where we took the Google search results, a regular page of search results, it's probably 10 years ago now, and we took all the Google branding off. And then we took the same results for the same search from another search engine. And then we just showed them to people and we asked them to rate the results with or without the Google branding. And it was pretty eye-opening. Although people judge the Google results as better, because they are, of course, the delta was significantly less than you might have hoped. And that was actually a pretty powerful argument in terms of why you need to invest in the differentiation, the product, and in the long-term brand. You can't just believe that your product alone is going to do it for you. Brand matters a lot.
It does. It does matter a lot. And I think the challenge is it's sometimes hard to quantify.
Yeah.
And I say that knowing a lot about how to quantify it. It's not that I haven't really spent a lot of this time on this. It can just be sometimes harder to figure out.
When you were pitching and involved in the decision at CVS, when you were worked at CVS for 7 or 8 years, and you decided as a company to move into become more associated with wellness and healthy lifestyle, and you guys took tobacco off the shelves. We don't need to re-go through that decision. I think you've spoken about that before, but what were the conversations like in terms of here's $1 billion or $2 billion of revenue we're giving up, but here is a brand halo lift we're going to give? How did you articulate that in the context of what's this doing for our brand and our positioning?
It's a good case study because generally people didn't want to give up $2 billion of revenue. That's kind of a hard thing to give up. And so there is a reality in there. And in fact, the evidence of that reality is that the idea of getting out of tobacco was not new. It had been around for years, but it hadn't gotten done for exactly that reality that, how are you going to do it? So where did that start? Just not to go too deeply into it, it started with, as you said, a vision for what's the future of the company. In most industries, the companies that were winning were the companies closest to the consumer. In healthcare, the pharmacists are closest to the consumer. So the idea started to percolate that could CVS become a large healthcare company because they see people much more than the doctors see people. This all starts to become an interesting idea with the one problem, which is you're profiting from selling the number one cause of preventable death in America. So you don't really look like a healthcare company. And so just to get into the decision on that then is not just hope of, hey, people will like us more. It was to knock down a barrier that was preventing growth towards a vision as well. Now, what is absolutely true is that nobody thought the stock was going to go up when that announcement was made. And it did. And in some ways, there's brand right there. Everybody knew somebody who'd been affected by tobacco, and they felt the power in making that move. And it made the stock go up, even though we told them we were cutting $2 billion in revenue. It's really fascinating to me.
It's a true case study of change in the industry. And I think it speaks to some of the things which I find fascinating about how marketing and vision for marketing and positioning of a company can, drive real business trajectory and outcomes. And one of the things I'm interested in your thoughts on is it feels to me that marketing as a discipline has generally not had a seat at the high table or whatever table you want to call it, right? I read a report recently that less than 84% of US companies do not have a marketer on their board or someone who has got real marketing experience in their background. And that just feels like a miss. And there is an opportunity right now with the rapid change of AI to actually have marketers, growth officers, people who are close to the customer, actually bring that insight into the boards, into the CEO suite. How do marketers do that more? How do we get more credibility? How have you achieved that in your roles?
By the way, I think there's a companion study that says the companies that do have a marketer on their board outperform. And I think that says a lot about the risk taking that they're willing to do and the consumer centricity that they have probably before they even get a marketer on the board, which is why they wanted one. I think that when there's a lot of components to this. The first part is that marketers need to realize that once they're a CMO, they're not on the marketing team anymore. They're on the SLT team. And once they're on the SLT team, they need to speak the language of the SLT team, not their marketing language. Marketing is what they do when they go back to their team, their shop. But on that SLT, you have to speak that language. And if you don't speak that language, you're just not as respected. Point two is no matter how much you speak that language, the decisions in marketing will be less certain than the decisions in most operations. Decisions in most operations, you can change how much you spend on a factory, change a floor around, move inventory here or there, do all this stuff. And there's a very quantifiable number that you'll get out of it. When you get to marketing, it's really based on a hypothesis of what will work for consumers. And sometimes that hypothesis gets refined through rapid testing and, Google has PMAX and things like this. But then somebody shows up and says, well, I'll give you more money. How many more sales can I get? And, you say, well, I think it could be this. And they're like, what do you mean you think it can be? Like, that guy over there tells me it's definitely going to be this number. And so my point on this is just to say generally that CEOs, business unit leaders, and finance leaders need to get comfortable that the decisions are naturally just going to be less tangible. Now, though, that is exactly the same as corporate strategy. It is exactly the same because that is a hypothesis of where your market is going to go and where you should focus your company.
Yeah, and it may not be controversial as such, but most of the time for us marketers, the challenge we have is apathy. People just don't care. They're not paying attention. That they're filtering.
Yeah, a great example of that is Buick, right? So Buick is a brand that a lot of people stop considering. And they don't think it's relevant to them. Buick is also now one of the fastest growing. I mean, it's only second to Cadillac in terms of being the fastest growing brand in America in automotive.
And just to be clear, it's not off a low base. It's actually genuinely growing really, really well.
Yeah. It's growing. It's not off a tiny base, but it's certainly a smaller brand. But it's growing.
Okay.
It sells more than Audi. Let me say that. So it's off a base bigger than Audi.
There you go.
Which is a remarkable fact, right?
Yeah. Audi Smackdown. I love it. Keep going.
And that was done. It started with product. Then it started with relevance and advertising and focusing on your base and doing all that stuff. So you can do this stuff. You can create growth in the right way, and you can get people out of apathy. It starts with momentum that starts with your core and giving them something that's new and exciting and has momentum and then is relevant to the circles just outside the core, and then they start to see it. They think that's cool too, and they want that stuff.
I completely agree. And it is fascinating looking at these case studies and seeing the crisis reaction, and then if it's going well, how you put your pedal to the metal, to quote your industry, and really accelerate in those positive moments when you can actually do that. One of the things about being a CMO today is that ability to move fast in the short term and the long term, of scale up when you want to, and then, plan for the long term as well. Something I've been fascinated by is what you've been doing and how you've reorged your agency structure. You brought in MediaMonks, and I'd love you just to tell our audience right now, because I know a little bit about it, and I'm speaking with Martin Sorrell later on this podcast. But what have you done with MediaMonks? What is the problem it solved, and how's it going?
Yeah, well, to understand MediaMonks, you have to back up to the agency structure we had and the agency structure that we wanted. So the agency structure we had was essentially a holding company model on different brands. And it was working reasonably well, I'd say. But what had happened over time is we had started basically outsourcing most of our marketing to these holding companies. So what we had was a kind of an underdevelopment of the capabilities of marketing within GM, and kind of the wrong model for where we were. So we needed to change the model. That's where we started. To do that, nobody in finance shows up and says, well, why don't you give me more money to hire people realistically? And so we said, well, we'll use the agency fees to do that. And that meant that we needed to reduce our agency fees. That then said, okay, well, what do we really want? And what we really wanted was elite creative teams only focused on creative versus being in all our operational details. And so we went through a whole process where we selected these individual, one for each brand, creative teams. And that's all they do. They just do great creative. And, I worked on the agency side, and I know the benefit of this, because what happens when an agency gets into all of your operations? Yes, their revenue goes up, but their culture changes. Their culture changes to be more of an operationally led versus creatively led culture. And there's a lot of voices in every meeting and every piece of creative. And all of a sudden it starts to degrade. And so we didn't want the creative teams to have any of that. We wanted them to be on their own. So that's what we did. That meant we still have a lot of work that has to get done below that hero level of creative. And we needed an approach to do that. And AI was, of course, coming along at the same time. And that's where we put Monks. To say, go across all of our brands, make sure that we can scale in the US with personalization, but just overall as well, and help us go globally, because the other regions, they don't have as much marketing money. So if they could take the US assets and transcreate them easily to be relevant in their markets, that could save us a lot of money as well. Now, the challenge with that whole thing, there were two challenges. One is, turns out cars are very hard to render in AI. And it's kind of obvious, but it was, even with it being obvious, it was harder than we thought it was going to be. You're talking about 20 million CAD data points, and wow. Headlights can move, and lights can move, and reflections change. And so we're getting through all of that. The second piece is that the AI doesn't know your brand. And that becomes a real challenge, because there have definitely been moments when we've been working, trying to get a picture out of AI, that somebody has said, I think I could literally take the picture faster than this. And so we had to create a platform with Monks that knows our brands, so it can choose the right environments, the right scenes, and knows our vehicles so that they look accurate. And we're still building this out globally, but that's really what Monks is there for, to help us build this platform that we program about our brands, we program about our products, and it gets smarter because we continually use it. And so it knows what we like, what we don't like, how we evolve, and that sort of thing. And that system, that's absolutely the future. There could be tweaks to it, or additions, or movements, but I don't have any doubt about that being the approach for the future. And I think every company's going to need it.
So I make sure I got this. You have individual creative agencies or creative teams supporting the major marks, the major brands. And then you have MediaMonks providing a sort of AI automation and scaling layer for all the sort of tier 2, tier 3, or other assets that need generating powered by AI.
Yeah, we call it the foundational content layer. Yeah, exactly right.
And is that different from your? I read about Metropolis, so that's your
Metropolis. That is Metropolis. Okay. Metropolis is the tool we've built with Monks that GM owns, that knows our brands and our products.
I got you. Congratulations to those, to all your teams, and it's also super nice in this era of AI and transformation and uncertainty. Creative still matters. What your brand stand for matters.
It totally matters. It totally matters. The machine, at least today, and I don't see it in the future, doesn't know taste that well. And you have an intuition and a vision for what you want to build. And all of the AI tools I've seen so far have to be directed by a creative who says, that's it, or that's not it. I mean, somebody has to decide that. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll be in a different place, but we are not there today. I feel like these AI tools are enabling creatives to be faster, sharper than ever, but the creatives keep the human soul, which is what really matters.
I love that. Keeps the soul there. And this is a debate we have inside of Google, right? In an AI world, there's this huge fear about slot. There's this huge fear about your paid media budgets actually only represents a pretty small fraction of the total impressions of marketing activities, especially once you put this layer of agentic and AI scale out there. So what is the process? How do you ensure that what MediaMonks is producing at scale with AI, 200 assets a day or whatever it may be, is meeting the GM grade for creativity to match what your individual brands are doing themselves?
Today, we still look at it and judge it that way. Maybe in the future, there'll be a better tool to tell us what we think. But there's definitely creative that we won't run because the backgrounds look too saturated and fake. Or the vehicle doesn't look the way we want it to look. It's not easy. Like, it's not like, oh, you press the button and everything comes out amazing. It's just not how it's working today. And I think you don't want creative slop out there. We can all agree with that, especially in very image-based products. On the other hand, I do think you want hundreds to thousands of versions of creative in social, for example, because first of all, there's probably hundreds or thousands of different types of people that you want to connect with. And second of all, you're going to have a higher chance of connecting with them in the right moment with that. They're not all going to see, they might each only see one ad, but I think we will have more relevance when we have more pieces of high quality creative than if we have the one or two that we had a hypothesis was going to be amazing.
We see that again and again and again, that within Google, within the algorithms and the optimizations, that you put more out there, it's got to meet you got to have it fit. We call it Google grade in our world, but the more you put out there, the more you can then start optimizing and seeing what actually performs and but passes your bar for quality and breakthrough. So final question. I think we're in a transformative moment for marketing. I think marketing can only grow in significance and importance and value to businesses. What one or two or three things do you think marketers need to deliver in order to move into that great frontier and new future for marketing right now?
You've got to own the business, number one. That's not new, but you do have to be seen as someone who owns the business. If you're not seen as someone who owns the business, you're not on the team. In a world of AI, brand becomes even more important because the AI engines will commoditize most of the functional attributes of your product. And so the reason you get chosen is brand. So you really have to think about what's the right way to build your brand in an AI world. And that's really going to matter. And then I think the next piece is, I think that for all marketers right now, we have got to figure out what is the organizational and operating model of the future where there are AI companions for a lot of people. And that's a giant change and brand new for a lot of people, including us. But we're going, right? I mean, time goes one direction, and this isn't going to slow down.
I loved what you said earlier about being builders and makers and, owning the business. And AI as a companion is a really good thought. And it's an enhancement, and it allows you to do more of what we think is great. But actually, the AI is not the solution itself. It's just a tool to drive more business value, more growth for our businesses.
Absolutely. If it doesn't know you and you don't control it, it will make you generic.
100%. So Norm, I'm going to throw a bunch of concepts at you. Which one of these are real signals we should be paying attention to? Which one of these are just noise that we should be tuning out? You ready?
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Leaning into culture.
Depends on who you are. I can't give you one word answer on that. I think many brands chase culture. That's noise. I think brands that create culture is signal.
I like that. Brand purpose.
Was signal. I think it's still signal. I think people will look for more meaning.
This is a controversial one. In-housing.
Signal. Without a doubt. I was in a meeting of a bunch of CMOs the other day, and I asked them a show of hands, who's planning on in-housing? 2/3 of the room raised their hand.
Signal or noise? AI consumer research.
Signal.
Hyper-personalization.
It's signal. It will be, as long as it's not crap.
Final one. Super Bowl or no Super Bowl?
Depends on your industry. I'm generally a no person. There are moments that it makes sense. Costs a lot of money, and you could use that money to connect with your customers through the rest of the year.
Norm, thank you so much for this conversation. Super fascinating. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you today, and I look forward to continuing success as Chief Growth Officer and the frontiers of marketing you're mapping your way through.
Thanks, Josh. And next time, Josh, I get to interview you.
Before we wrap, I want to leave you with 3 takeaways. Here are your field notes from the frontier. First, growth is not a magic trick. It is a long game. It also has to be the core goal for marketing organizations. Your CEO, CFO, and everyone else needs to believe your marketing is contributing to actual business growth. Second, change is always an opportunity. Change is exciting, sure. Change is also messy, uncertain, and scary. Great leaders learn to roll with change, to maintain an even keel and focus on what's next, not what was or might have been. Third, Norm was very clear on this. AI can scale execution, AI can speed things up, but it is humans that define intention. It is humans that bring the soul to marketing and communications. And this isn't going to radically change anytime soon. During our conversation, one idea really stuck with me. Norm described himself as a pebble against a mountain. That is the truth of leading inside large organizations. You can't force change by shouting louder. You win by building systems that make the new way the easier way. That is the real work of a Frontier CMO, creating conditions where embracing change becomes the natural way forward. Thank you for listening. For research, case studies, and tools to help you lead in this AI era, visit thinkwithgoogle.com. It's where we track the signals, challenge the noise, and share what innovators are testing in real time. We'll be back next time with another leader building the future while the rest of the industry watches. Until then, stay sharp and stay out in front.